this video I'll be describing 6 of the barriers to setting good boundaries. Hi, welcome to Feeling is Healing, where we support men and women who are looking to break free from bad relationships and to move forward into healthier ones. So in this video I'll be listing 6 different barriers to setting good boundaries, and it would be helpful if you, while you watch the video, if you think of the most recent example or the example that sticks in your mind the most of having to set a boundary, and you might find that 2 or even more of these factors are playing out together in when you're setting this boundary. So the first barrier which I'll mention today is the fact that people can typically test your boundaries. So they'll be waiting to see, how sure are you of your own boundary. So this brings me to the point that a boundary is really something that you know within yourself and something that you have defined within yourself, rather than something that you actually enforce upon others. So when you're really clear on your inner boundary, it means that when people try to push it, that you're going to be less likely to give in to that. So a quick tip on this point of people trying to push your boundaries is that you're not obligated to justify your boundaries to anyone. And in fact, the more you try to justify, you're actually opening the doorway to the other person challenging your boundaries. So for example, if you say, no, I can't do that because I'm very busy and blah blah blah, they could then say, oh, but it's only going to take 20 minutes, or oh, couldn't you just fit it in after, or and then they'll come back to you, and it kind of gives them something to challenge. Where if you just say no, they can't really say anything then without making it very obvious that they're disrespecting you and that they don't want to acknowledge, or they don't want to respect your boundary. So another thing that people might do in order to push your boundary is to guilt trip you. So they may say, oh, you're very rude for the manner that you said that, I didn't like, I thought it was very rude. And it's really a distraction from the actual point that you're trying to make, which is the boundary. And the reason is because they don't like the boundary, they have to kind of put it back on you and make out that you've done something wrong, when actually you had every right to set your boundary. And so people might pressurize you. That's the first point. So the second barrier to setting good boundaries is that you might experience guilt, and we sometimes refer to this as toxic guilt when it's not really appropriate to the situation. So you might feel this sense of guilt for setting a boundary. It might be a sign that you've got some kind of underlying limiting belief. For example, that you may believe it's wrong to put myself first. The other thing about guilt is that some people, you might think that you're feeling guilty for setting a boundary, but actually, why would you feel guilty for setting a boundary? You're looking after yourself, you're not actually trying to hurt anyone. And what happens is that if you have an emotion, and anger could be a common one here, that you have at some time developed the belief that anger is unacceptable. Whenever you feel anger, you may, before it becomes into your conscious awareness, you may reject that emotion, but emotions are energy. So if you reject an emotion such as anger, it doesn't just disappear, it's still there in your body. So it has to show up some way. So you might actually really be anger that you really feel deep down. But because you're rejecting that in yourself, you might be thinking that you feel guilty, when actually that's not really what's going on. And if you really tune into it more, with this feeling of guilt, you might realise it's kind of like a general sense of uneasiness or anxiety or dis-ease, and it's because you've got this energy of these rejected emotions going around your body. So that was the second point, was guilt. So we've had people testing your boundaries, number 1. Number 2 was guilt. Number 3 is fear of being alone. And what I would say here is this is a very natural, normal fear to have, because we're humans and we are social creatures, and we're designed to work together as a tribe and to live in communities. Communities are really important. So really that the fear is very, very natural. And sometimes when we're setting a boundary, the other person might not like it, and maybe they will reject us. It's a rational fear to have, and it's really about having the courage that if a relationship is meant to be, then the person will respect your boundary, and if not, then you'll be able to find someone whose values are more aligned with yours. So that's the first three barriers. So the fourth barrier is the reality of the situation may actually be very painful or unpleasant to actually have to acknowledge, and therefore it may feel easier to doubt yourself and decide that you're the one with the problem. Even it might sound strange that it's easier to just to believe that you are the problem, but when the actual reality of a situation is very painful, that can happen. So you might then just start telling yourself, oh, I'm paranoid, or oh, I'm being over the top, or I'm making a mountain out of a molehill, and you'll find some excuse to back out of the boundary, because you don't really want to believe that perhaps the other person is not respecting you, or is not the person that you thought they were. So moving on to the fifth barrier to having a boundary is wanting approval from others. And this wanting approval from others may lead you to fear the person's reaction to the boundary that you're setting. So you might think, oh, what if they think I'm being mean? What if they think I'm being judgmental? What if they think I'm wrong? And really what this gets to is that you don't actually need anyone else's permission. Your boundary is your boundary. It's not a right or a wrong. It's whatever is right for you. So this leads on to the final barrier for today, for setting a boundary, and that is taking responsibility for other people's emotions. So if you're taking responsibility for other people's emotions, you may be very fearful of how they'll react to your boundary. So for example, you may be very worried that they'll be angry. And if they were angry, you may then have this rationale that you must have done something wrong, when actually you haven't done anything wrong. If the person is angry, it's not your responsibility to control that. Your responsibility is to uphold your boundary. And if the other person is angry, then that's actually their issue, and that's their responsibility to process that anger. So if they're trying to, often people will, try and transfer their anger onto you, and your job is just to know that you have a right to your boundary, and just to set the boundary, and to know, the main thing is to know inside what your boundary is. And then if someone does react angrily to that, you'll know that actually you haven't done anything wrong. So we've covered now the 6 barriers that we've got here to setting boundaries. So the first one was the fact that people will test your boundaries to see how committed you are to them. The second one is that you might be feeling guilty, or you think you feel guilty. The third one is a fear of being alone. The fourth one is the pain of the reality that you might be having to face in order to set the boundary. The fifth one is a fear of how people will see you wanting approval from others. And the final barrier we had today was taking responsibility for other people's emotions. So what I do in coaching sessions with private clients is we'll work on uncovering the underlying limiting beliefs and the underlying emotions which will be preventing someone from being able to set a healthy boundary, and we'll work on figuring out what those are and then releasing them, and so that they can then be replaced with more empowering beliefs, such as that people respect me, I deserve to be respected, I am worthy, it's easy to set boundaries. So we can work on all of those things in the sessions. So I'd love to hear what your experiences are of setting boundaries and whether you relate to any of these 6 barriers that we've discussed today. Please feel free to write your comments below, and if you found the video helpful, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more videos.